Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says moving forward in base areas. This article here is speaking about the fears induced by the Naxalites and the measures taken by the government in order to counter the spread of Naxalism in the region of Chhattisgarh. When you look at left wing extremism as a concept, how did it evolve? What is the basis on which it continues to exist and perpetuate violence in number of states in India? First, when you look at the historical context, you have number of people, especially the poor and the gullible people, where historical injustice has been perpetuated on the poor people. Why? Because they were powerless. Because they were powerless and they did not have the lands, historically violence have been perpetuated on the poor people. So what exactly happens? All those poor people, the tribal people who were living in the forest areas, they were evicted. They were displaced and forcefully evicted. The eviction from the lands which they were traditionally occupying. With this, what they come under is the social exclusion. So they were not respected as the human beings. They were treated as the outclass. They were treated as the untouchables in the society. In spite of prevalence of laws, the laws were just on the paper, but this was not being implemented. So what exactly happens? The laws were there to make sure that there was no untouchability. They were part of the social group and organization, but poor implementation of special laws on the prevention of atrocities and bonded labor was only on the paper. Still, they were being controlled by the richer class as well as the landlords. The other major problem is the governance issues as well. Let's say they had to get some service in the form of education or in the form of health. In all these cases, there were few corrupt officials who were not even listening to them, and all these acts and schemes passed for the gullible, the poor sections, was not being implemented. Looking at all these issues, catching on to it, there were two issues that immediately surfaces. One is the genuine interest, the other is the illegal one. So what is the genuine interest? Let's say, for example, for a long period of time people are not given what they are expected to be given, then what would happen? There might be organizations who might come up together. They might organize mass organizations as well. They may go on a strike as well. This is a legitimate right. But if there are people who use this particular opportunity, come up with a set of people, raise arms and go against the country, go against the established government without actually going through the legitimate means, that is where the idea of Maoism immediately springs. So what is this whole concept? There are poor people, they were not able to get all the schemes and mechanisms that is required, but taking this into picture, there were certain section of the people who organize mass revolutions, and these are illegitimate ones, which means they are going against the established state, they are going against the established government, they're taking arms against the government. Why? Because they want to throw the established government and the democratic process. So the stated purpose of the Naxalite movement is to make sure that they have an alternative political structure away from the established forms of the government. That is what is called as the Naxalite movement. So the Naxalite movement wanted to overthrow what is called as the established government and wants to make sure that they establish an alternative form of government. So this struggle will be carried out through an armed struggle, the protracted people's war, and that is through the seizure of the power. That was the concept of Naxalism. So initially, Naxalism as a concept was about mass organization. It was about without weapons. It was about people coming together. But there was the concept of Maoism, which flows from China, where Maoist ideology says that power comes from the barrel of the guns. So when this mass organization turns violent, that becomes the Maoism. So the Naxalite movement initially, which was fighting for the poor, eventually goes on to become what is called as the Maoist force, which wants to overthrow the established government. So what we have right now is the Maoist struggle, where they want to overthrow the established government. As an established government, as a legitimate government, as the government of the people, the government has every right to make sure that the anti-social elements are not present in the society. So who are the anti-social elements? It happens to be the Maoists. So what should the government do? The government should make sure that all these Maoists are immediately neutralized, and it also has to make sure that all the poor and the gullible will also not tilted towards the Maoists but instead come towards the society established by the democracy. So what do we have? We have two important mechanisms. One is what is called as the offensive strategy. The other is what is called as the developmental strategy. So what is this offensive strategy? Basically, we have the Maoists. The Maoists want to overthrow the government. So the government is making sure through the use of its hard power, through the use of its security forces, that such Maoists are immediately neutralized. Why? Because they are not following the process of democracy. If they were so caring about the people and the poor people, they ideally had to contest the elections, they had to take part of the democratic process, convince the people that they would bring the change for the poor. But instead, what are they doing? They are catching upon the poor and the gullible, using this particular opportunity, attracting them to take the arms against the established government. So the government in this particular case is using an offensive strategy, and that happens to be the use of police force or the CRPF. Why? Because they have to neutralize the Maoist forces. That is what is the present context. So the present context in the present scenario speaks about additional battalions of the Central Police Force to Chhattisgarh. So that is what this article all about, which is speaking about the offensive strategy taken up by the central government in the state of Chhattisgarh. So when you have to take the other set of examples, so what are these other set of examples? Let's take for example, we have an offensive strategy called as the Operation Green Hunt. So what is this Operation Green Hunt? Let's say this is an all-out offensive program initiated by the government of India. What will happen in this? We have the paramilitary forces which go against the Naxalites. This was previously taken up by the government, that is Operation Green Hunt. Then we also have the special forces of the state governments of Andhra Pradesh and the state government of Telangana, which had also taken up similar instances of offensive strategy, where the special police force went against the Naxalites in Andhra Pradesh as well as in Telangana region. So an offensive force or the offensive strategy is use of force by the government to neutralize all those forces which are going against the government. So the illegitimate group, that which has been existing in the name of poor, will be neutralized according to this offensive strategy. So in the present context, in addition to the CRPF, what we will have is the Cobra units and the special task force of the Chhattisgarh, who will come together to neutralize all these Maoist forces. And apart from this, what we have is the national policy and the action plan initiated by the union government. So this national policy and action plan is a holistic program. So what does it do? It is a multi-pronged strategy. So what is this strategy? It basically has both the offensive one as well as the developmental strategy. So bringing in together the offensive strategy in terms of security and in terms of developmental strategy, ensuring the rights, entitlements to the local communities, is what is this national policy and action plan. So this additional battalions is a direct sync with the national policy and action plan, says this article. Now what we have to focus is, whenever there is an offensive strategy. So what is an offensive strategy? In case they are Maoists, they are not ready to surrender, they are not ready to contest the elections, they are not ready to listen to the government, they do not want to come up with a rehabilitation program as initiated by the government. In that case, the government will make sure with the help of its security forces, all these people are neutralized. When they are neutralized, there will be development of this region. Let me give you an example. Let's say for example, there is a particular region. This particular region is currently occupied by Maoists. Let's say there are about 1000 Maoists who are occupying this particular region. The security forces go and neutralize all these 1000 people. So what exactly happens now? This region, which was devoid of all the developmental activities, will now see the springing up of the developmental activities. Why? Until now, we did not not have the district administration, we do not have the district collectors, we do not have the tahsildars who are taking and bringing about changes within this particular area. But now the security forces have completely neutralized, sanitized this particular area, and there is no threat of the Maoism. So what exactly happens? There will be immediate benefits that which will be guaranteed to the people in that area. So once we have the offensive strategy, and if it works in detail, what we will have is the developmental strategies that which will be taken up by the government, that is in the local level, at the state level, and also by the union level, where it will also give them some amount for the development as well. So whenever such an offensive strategy happens, what we will have is also restricted movement of the Maoists. So now they'll be restricted to a small area. They would not be able to interfere with the civic activities. So what we will have is the development of that particular region. So there will be new borewells that will be dug, there will be health services that will be provided, the district administration scales up required amount of funds, what we will have is the PDS that will be established. So all these schemes and programs, that which they deserve, that which they should get, will be given when these Maoists are immediately neutralized. Apart from this, what we will also have is the infrastructural development. Because the Maoists were operating in all these regions, infrastructure were not being developed. So what we will have is now the development of the roads, and at the same time what we will have is the establishment of the mobile towers as well. Now we will also have the connectivity, and once there is connectivity, people will also know what are the schemes and programs initiated by the government. And apart from this, once the infrastructure is also laid, for laying of this infrastructure, we have something called as the Manrega. So people will also get engaged into this process. They will also get jobs as well, and once they will get the jobs, they will not move to the Maoist places, or they will not be attracted towards the Maoist ideology. And finally, what we will have is the democratic setup as well. As of now, these people would not be allowed to vote. Why? Because the Maoists have captured power in this particular region. In case there are people who are encouraged, in case there are people who are enthusiastic and they want to vote as well, there are cases where these people have been butchered as well. So once these Maoist forces are neutralized, what we will have is the democratic institutions, which can be in the form of the Panchayati Raj institutions, that which can be present in that particular region. So what we will have is the empowerment on all the three levels. One is the political democracy, the political justice being delivered to them. Now they have the right to vote. Then we have the economic justice that is being developed, that is through all the developmental schemes. And finally, what we have is the social justice, that which is also being delivered to them. All these people who were facing historical injustice because they were part of the scheduled tribes, because they were evicted from the lands, are now given justice and dignity by the government. So what we have is the restoration of the social, political and economic justice. So what should be the way forward? What does this article basically suggest? It currently says that even after all these actions initiated by the government officials, there might be few cases where the Maoists might still want to come back to this particular region where developmental activities have been initiated. So the security forces need to be very alert. They have to make sure they do not give rise to any of the Maoist forces. They also need to be watchful about it. They also have to make sure that there are new security camps that are established in all these places. And apart from this, the most important factor is to take the villagers into confidence. Why villagers into confidence? Because initially the villagers might not trust the government or the government officials. Why? Because the Maoists might have indoctrinated them with such an ideology. So what we have to make sure is to take all these villagers into confidence, bring them onto our platform and say that you have to give up the arms so that you are able to reap the benefits of what is present as part of the government developmental programs. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, is a person's address public information? This article currently discusses whether the address or the person's living address, can it be a public information, or this is more to do with the privacy of that particular person. We will try and understand whether this particular idea of address is it a public one or it is a private one. We have to understand a recent case that happened in India. We have one of the activists. His name is Saket Gokule. He had filed an RTI application with the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. He had filed this application for seeking some information from the ministry. The ministry, while it was about to give this information, also displayed his name, his phone number, as well as his house address in that particular image which was uploaded on the website. Once his phone number and his address was displayed on this particular website, people called him up, they started threatening him up, they started abusing him. So in this particular backdrop, the Bombay High Court is where this particular person files a case. Why does he file a case? That is because it is violating his fundamental right to privacy. And there has been a threat to his life as well, where people are calling him up and are abusing him about this particular application. So the Bombay High Court immediately ordered the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting to remove Gokhale's contact details from its website. So the question that we have to answer here is whether a person's address is public or private. The first part of this article currently goes on to say that address is about a public one. How does the author substantiate it? Let's say, for example, in the 90s and in the early 2000s, we were all having landlines in our houses. So mobile was something which was not known to us, and mobile was something which was not being afforded by number of people as well. So what we had was the BSNL lines or the landlines that was given to all the houses. So we have something called as the yellow pages. So what is this yellow pages? It is a directory. So this directory will have a particular phone number of that particular person. So we were able to see that particular person's number as well as the address. So the author says in this particular case there was no violation, and the address of that particular person when it comes to the telephone directory became a public one. Then the author takes into consideration the electoral vote list. Let's say, for example, we have the electoral roll, we have our names in that electoral roll, we have a particular ward, we have our names in that particular ward, and we will also have the election ID number as well. In all these election IDs and the rolls, what we will also have is the addresses. So everyone would be able to access from that particular area, and the election commission has also uploaded this on the website as well. So what do we have? We have the address of that particular person residing in that particular ward, whose address is clearly given in that particular list. Then we also have the land records. These also contains the details of the ownership. This also has the address as well. So let's say if I have to see a particular land, if I have to venture out and see if this is a legitimate land of that particular person, if this has been bought by that person in a legitimate way, how do I get to know? I need to know that person and his name and also his address. So the land record again will also have the ownership details and the address of the person. Finally, in case there is a person who's committed a cognizable offense. So what is a cognizable offense? Let's say, for example, a murder, let's say, for example, a rape, where the police need not have to take the permission from the magistrate for arresting a particular person. So in all cases of FIRs where it is a cognizable offense, again the address of that particular person will also have to be displayed on the websites. This has also been given permission by the Supreme Court of India. In all these cases, what we actually see is that a person's address can be easily accessed by most of the people in the country, or it can be accessed by the people in that particular locality. Now the question is, why is that these addresses are put on the public forum? That is because of couple of advantages. So what are these advantages? Let's say, for example, let's say there is a Manrega program, or let's say there is a welfare program. These welfare schemes and programs are intended only for a particular section of the people. It is not for everyone. So these people, along with whatever details they have given, should also give their addresses. Why? Because this will prevent the ghost accounts. So we as the government end would be able to go to that particular person and have a sudden inspection whether this particular person who's taking away the welfare schemes and programs, is it right? Is he the right beneficiary? So we would know whether that person is right or wrong and whether he deserves that particular scheme or not. So these addresses will serve these beneficiaries, and the government would also be able to make inspections and would also be able to conclude that they are the right beneficiaries. And apart from this, if everything is working properly, people will also start trusting the government as well. This is where the principle of transparency also comes into picture, and this is where the people will start trusting the system and they will also have confidence with respect to the government activities. So the first part of this article currently goes on to say that if people have given their addresses and if it is for the larger public interest, if it is for making sure that there is transparency in the system, it is a fair deal, says the first part of the story. The second part of the article speaks about this case in specific. The article is speaking about Saket. So what we have to link is to another case, that which was declared by the Kolkata High Court. So what exactly happens? We have Avish Goenka versus Ashish Kumar Roy, which happens to be a case where judgment was delivered by the Kolkata High Court. So what exactly happens? In the Goenka case, we have an RTA activist. In this particular case, the RTA activist does not give his residential address. The person who files this particular RTI application with the government of West Bengal does not actually give the address of this particular person, but instead he gives the address of the post box number. Why does he give so? That is because in case the address is known to the people about whom he is asking this information, there can be threats that which might be given to this particular person. So sensing that his life would be under danger, this person Goenka did not actually give the address. But what exactly happens? This goes to the government. So the government which has to give this particular information asks for the address. That is when this person approaches the High Court of Calcutta. So the High Court of Calcutta looks into all these cases and finally delivers a judgment saying that Mr. Goenka need not have to give his own address in this particular case, as this can threaten his life and his life can also be snatched away. Now, our important factor with respect to this article is whether do we have laws which speak about RTI and the privacy. What we have to focus is on one of the important sections, and that is section 8 of the RTI Act. So what does this act basically speak about? Let's say for example, there is a person who is asking for the information from the government. So I file an application, I request the government to give me some information. This information need not be given if it is not helping the general public and if it is violating the privacy of some other person. So this section 8 speaks about right to information and privacy. So if it is serving the general public, if it is giving an idea about the public activity, only then the information can be revealed by the government, by the public information officer. But if it is violating the privacy of another person and there is no public interest involved in it, in such a case they need not have to give this information, is present under RTI section, that is Right to Information Act of 2005. So what is that we can come to a conclusion? So we can come to a conclusion, and the author currently says that whenever it is of public interest, if it is about government jobs, if it is about ration cards, if it is about caste certificate which has a general public interest in it, which is important for the governance of the country, in such a scenario address can be delivered. But in certain scenarios which is about privacy, let's say for example it is to do with medical records, or let's say for example my banking transaction, which is something intricate to me, which is something in private to me, in such a scenarios these need not be given outside as part of the right to information. So the article in this particular case says that RTA activists going forward can protect themselves, they need not have to use their own addresses, use the PO boxes address, that is to make sure that threats do not come to all these activists. So all in all, what we have to understand is that two important perspectives. One is in general context, the other is in specific context. In general context, they are revealed, that is for the general public interest, and they need not also have to be revealed, that is because of the privacy issues. So all in all, a balance of right to information and privacy needs to be maintained is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the farm reforms initiated by the government of India. Kindly note, we have discussed this article in the past 1 to 2 weeks. Our discussion today will be restricted only with respect to what is being focused, that is the Farmers Producer Trade and the Commerce Act of 2020. In this article, the author currently goes on to say that the view that the assumption taken by the government of India is not right, says the author. So what does he say? According to the author, we have what is called as the mandis. So what are these mandis? It is where the farmers comes up, he presents all these goods, then the mandi pays him something, and from the mandi what we have is the middle brokerman or the middleman, and they carry forward this particular agricultural crops, and ultimately it will be delivered to the consumer. So what is the assumption of the government of India? The assumption of the government of India is that with the mandi, what we will have is the middleman, what we will also have is the commission agents who will be taking away all the money. It is why the farmers are not getting all the money that is required, and as a result, the farmers are the sufferers, the consumers are the sufferers, and that is why the government came up with this particular law where the farmer is given a provision that he can sell his particular product not only to this APMC mandi, to any person even in the agricultural market. So this assumption made by the government is wrong, says the author of this article. Why? Because the author says the farmers not only sell it to the agricultural mandis, but they also sell it to the private trader, they also sell it to the input dealer as well. So they are already selling it to these two people, and that is what the author looks at. Why does the farmer now sell it to the private trader and the input dealer? That is because according to the author, there are not enough mandis as well. So because there are less mandis, there is already a factor where they are sending it to the private trader as well as this input dealer. The author further brings into picture the idea of small and marginalized farmers. Why does he bring the idea of small and marginalized farmers? That is because according to the author, he says if they have small plot of land and if they have restricted produce, in such a scenario, they would not want to spend on the transport, they do not want to spend on moving this particular produce from one end to another. In such case, these small and agricultural small farmers are already selling it to the private traders. So our assumption that they are only selling it to the mandis is wrong, says the author in this case. Why? One is there are already less existing mandis. Because there are less mandis, because they have to travel to a long distance, there is already a provision that these farmers are selling it to the private traders and the input traders. And apart from this, there are small and marginal farmers because they do not want to spend on the transport sector, because they have to move their produce from one place to another. The private traders are already procuring it. That is what the author says in this particular case. So as a result, the assumption made by the central government that they are only selling it to mandis is wrong, says the author in this case. Apart from this, he also brings a positive narrative about the mandis. So what does the author say? The author in this particular case says that all the money that is collected in the APMC's mandi will also be used in the development of the infrastructure. So only abusing and criticizing the mandi for all the negative role is not right, says the author. And apart from this, the money that is collected, let's say in the state of Punjab. It is also being used for constructing rural roads, running medical and veterinary dispensaries, also providing drinking water facilities, improving the sanitation in that particular area, and also providing electrification benefits in that particular region as well. So it is not only the development of APMC mandis in that place, it is also used for infrastructural development in the village, says the author. So the government in the near future, according to the author, he says, will have to dilute the laws, or even if it is not, if it has to bring the reforms, it has to speak to the farmers, says the author. So the need of the hour is not to reduce the impact of the mandis, but it has to increase the number of mandis and also increase better mandis, says the author. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about India and Nepal relationship. In the past several months, we have had a bleak relationship with Nepal. This is primarily because of two important issues. One is because of the nationalistic trend in the politics of Nepal. The other is because of the political map which Nepal had come up as part of its changes and introduced some parts of India into the map of Nepal. So these two issues had made sure that there was a bleak relationship between India as well as Nepal. These two issues between India and Nepal has resulted in exchange of words at high decibels. So what is this issue all about has been explained in one of our videos, and the link for the same will also be given in our description box, so kindly look into it. Preliminary practice questions. Which of the following statements is or correct about Indian peacock softshell turtle? It is a species of turtle found in South Asia. It is listed on the IUCN Red List as a vulnerable species. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is both. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to Barak River, which of the following statements is or correct? It rises in the Indian state of Assam. It flows through the state of Manipur, Nagaland, Mizoram and Assam. National Waterway Developmental Activity has been initiated on Barak River. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is 2 and 3. Why is the option 1 wrong? Because it does not rise in the Indian state of Assam, but instead it rises in Manipur Hills in the state of Manipur. Why have we taken both these practice questions? Because of the reference given under this article. Kindly remember, when it comes to this particular turtle, it is also listed as a Schedule 1 species. Most of these turtles also have a threat as well. That is because they are hunted for the human consumption. These species live in rivers, they are being polluted, there is sand mining in these rivers where they are present, and there is damming of the rivers and conversion of the water bodies into the agricultural land. All this has become a threat to the Indian peacock softshell turtle. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following statements about Corruption Perception Index. It is an index published annually by Berlin-based Transparency International. The score runs from 0, which is very clean, to 100, which is highly corrupt. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is 1 only. Why? Because the score of 0 basically means that particular country is corrupt, and if it is 100, it means that country is clean. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, if they have a score of 100, it means they are less corrupt. If they have a score of 0, it means they are the most corrupt country. In this particular case, we have the statistics which are given by the Transparency International. So we have taken up this article. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following statements about BRICS grouping is or correct? The BRIC grouping's first summit was held in China. It is headquartered in Beijing. Which of the statements are correct? Both the statements given here are wrong. Why is the first statement wrong? That is because it was not held in China, but instead it was held in Russia. And also remember, its headquarters is not in Beijing, but it is in Shanghai. So when you have to remember where the headquarters is, let me give you a trick. It's a small trick, it's a simple trick. If you have to remember the headquarters of AIIB, in that particular case, remember the last alphabet. It says B, so the headquarters is in Beijing. So we are speaking about BRICS in this particular case. So what is the last alphabet? It is S. So its headquarters is in Shanghai. Don't forget this trick in case in the exam tension you happen to forget it. Remember the last alphabet, that will help you remember the headquarters of that particular organization. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following differences between the Gandhara and the Mathura school is or correct? The Gandhara school was profoundly influenced by Greek methodologies. The Mathura school of art was entirely influenced by Indianism. It was Gandhara school, the figures of Buddha were more spiritual and carved mainly in grey and bluish grey color with the finest details. The stone used in Mathura school of art was red sandstone. The sculptures were less spiritual. Which of the statements are correct? Both the statements given here are correct. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember we have these following differences. Also remember this can be a prospective question when it comes to the mains answer writing as well. So kindly remember all these differences as mentioned in this PPT. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following pairs. We have the river and the sea that it flows into: Mekong, Andaman Sea, Thames, Irish Sea, Volga, Caspian Sea, Zambezi, Indian Ocean. Which of the statements are correctly matched? The answer to this is 3 and 4 only. Why? Mekong is not Andaman Sea, but it happens to be in the region of South China Sea, and Thames is not Irish Sea, but it happens to be North Sea. Now let's look into the mains practice question. The problem of Naxalism is the single biggest internal security challenge ever faced by our country. Analyze the statement and discuss the offensive and developmental strategies initiated by the government to counter the spread of Naxalism. In India, where agriculture employs millions, leaving farmers' fate to the vagaries of market is a legislative misadventure. Will the Farm Acts address the genuine fears of the farmers? Critically examine. So please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and also come up with constructive criticism. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.